Good evening, everyone. We'll now call the public meeting to order. The Administrative Policies Committee will host a public meeting beginning at 6 p.m. Today, Thursday, July 11th, 2024, to consider tax write-offs pursuant to Sections 357 and 358 of the Municipal Act 2001. Are there any members of the public present who wish to speak to this item? Okay, with that, we will close the public meeting. Please note the time. It's 6 p.m. Okay, I will call the meeting to order at 6 p.m. Do I have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor Glenn and seconded by Councillor Amos. All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. I should have asked Madam Clerk, do we have quorum? Okay, very good, thank you. Okay, confirmation of the minutes. Do I have a mover and seconder to confirm the minutes of the Administrative Policies Committee meeting number 04-2024 held on Thursday, April 11th, 2024? Moved by Councillor Amos, seconded by Councillor Glenn. All those in favor? Okay, and that's carried. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none. There are no delegations this evening. There are no briefings this evening. Okay, moving on to business. I will ask if we have a mover and seconder to resolve ourselves into the Rideau Crest Home Board of Management. Okay, Councillor Amos, and seconded by Councillor Glenn. All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. I will now invite Ms. Keys to introduce the Rideau Crest Home Report for March to June 2024. Thank you very much.
Thank you and good evening. This is the third report received by the committee for 2024 and includes information on operations of the home between March 16th to June 15th of this year. The home continues to maintain an overall occupancy rate above 97% for 2024 and continues to have a growing wait list, which exceeds previous years at 510 people as of May 31st. Rideau Crest had 13 incidents reportable to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care during this reporting period. The Ministry was in the home on June 3rd to 5th and again on the 7th and 10th to complete an inspection on critical incidents submitted to the Ministry. Staff received the inspection report related to this visit, and the inspectors noted 2 areas of non-compliance of minimal risk. Both concerns have been actioned to date. You will note in this report the results of our annual resident and family satisfaction surveys. The home has been completing these surveys for many years as they are legislated. However, due to resident capabilities and families' willingness to complete, we are struggling each year for participation. With the results, we have obtained both residents and families. We will complete an operational planning day to action the opportunities within the survey results. We have completed this day as it was previous to submitting this report, and it was very successful, and we do plan to have this again in future years. The provincial commitment to increasing direct hours of care and allied health professional staffing across the sector, the nursing department at Rideau Crest has added further frontline staff as of April 2024. This is the final round of this funding. Since the inception of the funding initiative in November of 2021, Rideau Crest has added 30 full-time and 23 part-time funded positions. The home continues to actively recruit for these positions. At the end of March, the province released the 2024 budget, to which long-term care was noted in a number of areas. The level of care funding has increased by 6.6% to the level of care funding envelopes for the year of 24 and 25. For Rideau Crest Home, this is additional revenue of $410,000 for 2024 and an anticipated $513,000 for 2025, above what we have budgeted. Funding to pharmacies by the province will be kept at $1,500 annual fee per bed this year, as opposed to the planned decrease to service providers. This funding flows directly from the province to pharmacies as an attraction to provide service to long-term care homes. The 4 hours of care funding allocation by the province will continue and will be built into base funding for homes moving forward. The province has also provided $202 million to eligible long-term care operators for a one-time funding through the other accommodation envelope to help with minor repairs and redevelopment projects. Rideau Crest has received this funding, and it is $427,000 for this year. We are currently planning actively for this money. As you know, we have a number of renovation projects currently underway that we will be utilizing this funding for. The Rideau Crest Funding Case Mix Index for the assessment period of April 1st, 2022 to March 31st, 2023 was 0.9794, which will dictate the per diem funding levels for the fiscal year of April 1st, 2024 through till March 31st of 2025. This is down slightly from the previous year, which is a loss of revenue of just over $3,000. There was a noted decrease to most long-term care homes with this year's announcement. As of May 31st, Rideau Crest had spent 32.65% of its municipal contribution, which excludes commitments, and is just over $600,000 under budget. Much of this underspend is a direct result of the nursing department. The underspend in nursing is attributed to wages. For the team at the home continues to actively recruit to fill the residual positions of the increased hours of care funding. The new positions that we posted, we did see many internal part-time staff take these full-time positions, which is great, but we then have the part-time vacancies on top of every year vacancies to continue to fill. So we are actively looking at these. It's not as much of a concern during the summer months, as we do hire 25 temporary part-time nursing students to fill off PSW roles from May through to the end of September. As well, another large contributor to the underspend is the delay in finalizing collective bargaining. The home will see a retroactive wage payment once ratified for the nursing department, as well as the other internal departments, to the tune of 250 staff, so it is a significant increase for us. And that's all I have. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee? Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Ms. Keys, thank you for the report. It's very well done and very detailed. A couple of comments in regards to the KFLNA Public Health Unit inspection. I just wanted to send congratulations to your team for a clear inspection for your food services area. Well done. So, you had indicated in one of your paragraphs that you've hired an ADOC for one of your terraces, and that gives you now your full complement. And then further into that report, you talk about the number of nurses that have been hired. In your verbal report, you also go down that road of you're indicating that you're still short some nurses. Capacity-wise, are you able to meet operational demands?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we are. In regards to what the province targets are for the 4 hours of care funding, all homes must see 4 hours of care every day for each resident. We are just above that with our staffing complement currently. So we are still just continuing to fill vacancies from leaves, as well as some of those residual positions from staff going to full-time. Perfect.
In your report under financial considerations, you talk about the $1.82 billion that the province is supplying. You had indicated that the home is getting $440,000 this year and $510,000 next year. Is that part of that envelope that you're referencing with the $1.42 billion? Or is that a different envelope that is coming?
Sorry, thank you. So that increase is in addition to what we see for our funding envelopes from the province. So that is on top of what we've already budgeted coming from the province, which is approximately $12 million for our envelopes each year. This is in addition to that.
Okay. Is there a ballpark as to how much that you think that may be that you're going to be receiving?
So it will be, on top of the $12 million, it will be just over $400,000 for this fiscal year, and it will be just over $500,000 for the next.
That's that number
Yes.
I was referencing.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That's it. Thank you.
Councillor Glenn.
Thank you, and through you. The report was very thorough, so the question I have is a bit more of a curiosity one, and I don't know if you can answer it. So this HSCPOA organization that's now set up for PSWs, any idea why the government made it an optional requirement for PSWs rather than mandatory? It didn't seem to make much sense to me to create this to sort of give some sort of standards or support for ensuring that people were up to par and then to make it optional.
Thank you for the question. I don't have a lot of answers to provide to you. There has been talk of creating such a group for a number of years for PSWs. More so, I think, to support PSWs, if you will. And so it has remained optional now. There has been no indication to us that it will be mandatory in the future.
And so is there a fee for them to join? And I'm asking because I remember this conversation about 15 years ago, and speaking with the ministry on it as other professions were being regulated, and one of the primary reasons not to regulate PSWs was cost. So is there any cost for the PSWs to join, and is that something that you cover if they do join?
I'm not certain if there is a cost at this point. I can look into that for you. If there was a cost, we do cover costs for other registered staff that are licensed within our home, so I would assume that maybe we would look at that if that was an option and it did become mandatory. I'm not sure at this point if there's a cost. We haven't had anybody approach us indicating that they're even interested in joining this group so far.
Okay, are there any other questions from members of the committee? Councillor Hassan? No? Okay. Are there any questions from members of the public? No? Okay, now we will need a mover and a seconder to rise from the Board of Management for Rideau Crest Home. Moved by Councillor Glenn and seconded by Councillor Amos. All in favor? Okay, and that's carried. Thank you very much. Our second item of business is the audited financial statement and other financial information of the Corporation of the City of Kingston, year ended December 31st, 2023. I invite staff, Ms. Huber and Ms. Cox, to introduce this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I can just start, and just a few comments that I wanted to make and bring to the attention of the committee on the financial statements, and then I will turn it over to the audit team to present their audit findings report. With respect to the financial statements that are in your package, just a reminder, I'm sure most folks remember this, these are consolidated financial statements, so not only the city operations, which you're used to seeing throughout the year, but also consolidated with the Downtown Business Improvement Area, the Library Board, the Housing Corporation, and our share of public health, as well as the water, sewer, and gas operations are all consolidated within there. Just a couple of things that I wanted to mention on the balance sheet, the consolidated statement of financial position, which is page 37 of the package. So this is the statement that gives us an idea at the end of the year on the city's financial position. Basically gives us a snapshot of the economic resources that are controlled by the city, so both the assets as well as net of any liabilities. Overall, for 2023, we continue to report a very healthy financial position at year end. Our municipal equity is just over $1.8 billion and up by about $77 million from last year. We do show a net financial debt line, which I often get questions on why it's a net debt line. But as you can see, because we use debt to cover some of our capital assets, which are below that line, that's what creates the negative amount. Because we have utilized a financial asset, the debt, to pay for those non-financial assets that are down below. The other thing that I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention is we had a few new accounting standards this year, and Note 19 talks in great detail about the different standards. The one that was applicable to us and significant in terms of a change to our statements is the one for asset retirement obligations and a new accounting standard that we had for that. And there was a bit of high-level information in the report on this, but in accordance with the Public Sector Accounting Board's principles, so a new standard, Section 3280, came into effect this year and basically requires us to account for any liabilities in the annual financial statement that relate to legal obligations that we potentially may have, or any kind of obligation we may have when we retire our tangible capital assets. And the recognition of this liability could result from existing legislation. It might be a regulation. It may be an agreement or a contract that we have that requires us at the end of the life of an asset to basically put some money into it in terms of retiring it. In terms of some of the ones that we've had with respect to the city, in terms of what's on the financial statements, the majority of our asset retirement obligations resulted from the closure activities or anticipated closure activities we might have with our buildings, including the removal and disposal of designated substances such as asbestos, as well as any decommissioning costs we might have for our fuel storage tanks, and our closure, post-closure obligations with respect to landfills. Landfill obligations is not new. You've seen that on the financial statements before under a different standard. That standard has been ceased, and those monies now come under the asset retirement obligation. So that's not a new amount. But certainly the closure activities, particularly for our buildings, which is probably the majority, was a significant number. You will see on the statement of financial position of a liability of just over $24 million, which represents our asset retirement obligations. We book that liability. We also book the other side of that to the cost of the asset. So for a building, the asset retirement obligation gets charged to that asset, and it gets depreciated the same way that we depreciate our assets. So you will also see an increase in our depreciation each year now as we depreciate basically that $24 million. In the past, if we were tearing down a building and it had asbestos, that would just be an expense that year. So we didn't ever have a liability set up before. So it is a little bit different. Finance teams worked very hard with the support of KPMG this year. This was a huge undertaking to go basically through all of our assets and identify whether or not there was a retirement obligation, and if so, what the liability estimate might be. Because in a lot of cases, it was just that. It was an estimate in terms of that. We have adopted this, what they call a modified retroactive basis, which basically means we've gone back in the financial statements and reported this as if we always had had this standard. So you will see that our 2022 numbers have been amended. If you compare them to the report a year ago, you will see they have changed. And so we've actually reported these amounts as if we had had it all along, and the 2022 numbers updated accordingly. For those that are really interested, note number 19 gives you quite a bit of information on the restatement, so you can see what it was last year, what the changes are, and what it is next year. And then note 21, which will be a note that will continue from year to year, provide you with the current year disclosure and what the actual changes were for the current year, and you'll see that one going forward. With respect to the statement of operations, the old income statement, nothing here too much that I want to discuss. You will see that it has been updated for the asset retirement obligation adjustments, particularly where we have amortization, which is by the department on this statement. Other than that, this statement will, if we were looking at it in an unconsolidated basis, so pulling out some of our agencies that are consolidated, this ties in directly to the numbers that were reported to council last Tuesday night when you received the fourth quarter report. So it does tie into that if prior to actually adding in the other agencies. Just a couple more things. I think I say every year my favorite statement, so I can never leave without not saying something. But so the statement of consolidated schedule of municipal equity, which is on page 40 of your package. So to me, this is the one that makes more sense in our municipal world. This is kind of our tax basis or our cash basis of accounting. And so you will see there the various surpluses and deficits for the city, for the utilities, and for the other agencies there. And again, that would be for the city, that would be the one that would tie back into our fourth quarter operating report. It gives you information on our investments in our tangible capital assets, and you will see there coming off of that balance is the asset retirement obligation. And then it gives you a list of our reserves and reserve funds at the end of the year, which is also useful information in terms of assets that we have going forward in terms of providing services in the future. The only other thing I wanted to mention that you will see before I turn it over to Lori, in the auditor's audit findings report, there is mention on two what they call misstatements. So I call them summary of audit adjustments, but they are misstatements. One of them was an uncorrected misstatement, which means it was something that the auditors noted, discussed with us that it's one we may want, because it was about $3.5 million, we might want to actually make it. And we made a conscious decision not to make it, which is why it does say it's unrecorded. It is not included in these financial statements. It does not impact the audit opinion at the end of the year, but it is reported to this committee. This $3.5 million relates to the one-time federal payments in lieu of taxes mitigation payment that we received at the end of last year. So you'll recall that the city was hit when the province changed the business education tax rates and lowered them. And because we get to keep some of that, it impacted our payments in lieu money by about $1 million a year. And we had been lobbying back and forth in terms of that lost revenue with both the province and the feds who actually pay the PILs. And late in 2023, the province announced they were giving us this mitigation payment, which was basically to make us whole for 3 years. They made it very clear it was a one-time payment. They weren't going to do it again. We thought that payment was coming in 2024, and so we included it, and you may recall in the 2024 operating budget, it showed as revenue. We kept about $1.5 million for operating purposes, and the rest went to our municipal capital reserve fund. So council approved that as part of the 24 operating budget. Wouldn't you know, the province paid it early. We received it late in December. So from an audit perspective, it is a 2023 revenue. There is no argument against that. It really is a 23 revenue. If we had shown it in the 23 revenue, it'd have come on your fourth quarter report. We'd have had to get authority to move that into various funds. It would have messed up what we had in the budget. And by the end of close to the end of December, we had the budget for 2024 pretty much done and those binders pretty much prepared. So the last thing we wanted to do was go back and change all of that. So long story to say, at the end of the day, we did not make that adjustment. It does not affect the audit opinion. And at the end of the day, the monies and the use of those monies and council's approval of those monies did not change whether we showed it in 23 or 24. The other entry that's on there, which actually was corrected, does relate to the asset retirement obligations. And as KPMG was reviewing those calculations, there was a mistake in one of our calculations that they had caught, and we reviewed it together and looked at it, and we actually did make that adjustment to the financial statements. So that amount has actually been incorporated in there. So with that, Mr. Chair, perhaps I can turn it over to KPMG and they can finish up with their audit findings report.
Thank you, CFO Kennedy. That sounds great. Please proceed.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here before you to speak to the results of our audit for the fiscal 2023 year. Joining me here this evening is Caitlin Cox, who has worked very closely with me on the file this year. So between the two of us, we'll walk you through the highlights of our audit findings report, but certainly Ms. Kennedy has done a phenomenal job to certainly touch on the highlights this year. It certainly was a unique year with lots of change, and so we'll walk you through each of those items in due course. So where we are with respect to the audit is, just as a reminder to the group, we are largely complete with respect to our audit. However, audit window does stay open actually until council accept and approve the financial statements. So when the financial statements are put forward to council and they are approved, that will be the date upon which we will release our audit opinion and final. So the audit window does stay open to the extent anything happens in this intervening period, which might impact either the numbers for 2023 or any subsequent event note disclosures. We'll still certainly stay close with the team to make sure that we are apprised of any matters that we should be. So moving along in our report, I'll stop briefly on page number 93, which is really a slide to marry up the 2 points of contact that we have with this committee annually through the course of our engagement as your external auditor. So as you would recall, quite a while ago, back in the fall, we had delivered to you an audit plan with where we thought the audit was going to go, recognizing, of course, we were very much aware of the new accounting standards, which is really the highlight for fiscal 2023. But this slide here really shares with you where we ultimately landed in terms of the completion of our audit. And really the high level story here tonight is to share with you that we were able to execute our audit in accordance with our plan. Certainly nothing uniquely different as we are working through the details with the team to alert you to in that regard. One piece that I will say as part of a financial statement audit, certainly at KPMG, it continues to be very much risk-based. meaning we stand back, look at the financial statements as a whole, try to identify where we believe there's a greater risk of material misstatement occurring, and certainly adopting an audit approach accordingly. In addition to those unique risks we might identify through the course of the audit are certain presumed risks. So not to raise any alarm bells by any stretch, but we are required to address the presumed risk of fraud in any financial statement audit in Canada. So we've done that again this year. And in addition to that, as part of Canadian auditing standards, we are also required to incorporate an element of unpredictability. So you would not have seen what that element was as part of our audit plan, but we've shared this with you here on page number 93, related to the work that we did with respect to the procurement policy at the city, and certainly nothing significant to bring to your attention. The next slide gives you a little bit more detail around that presumed risk of fraud related to management override. And with that, I'll turn things over to Caitlin to walk you through the next few items.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lori. I'll pick up on page 95 of our report, which is titled Other Matters, and it's really the audit highlights or items we wanted to flag to the committee's attention. As Ms. Kennedy alluded to, and she did a wonderful job, there was a significant lift required in the current year on both the management team and through our audit process due to the new accounting standards that were in effect for the current fiscal year. This page here highlights some additional information on asset retirement obligations. I won't go over the background or the accounting, as I believe that was covered very well. However, I do want to reemphasize the amount of work it took, so thank you very much to the team for putting all of this together for us. There's lots of information on this slide, but really the key takeaways are twofold. From an audit perspective, one of the key items we spent our audit time looking at was ensuring the liability was complete. So we're reviewing the scoping of the entire asset listing and ensure that there was nothing that was missing when that initial liability was recorded. The second key component we complete as part of our audit work is looking at the accuracy or the true number that was recorded in the financial statements. To do this, we actually developed an independent expectation for the liability using standard costing models. Ultimately, there's lots of qualified engineers on staff at the city that were able to develop the liability hand in hand with the finance team using internal information. So we performed an independent expectation to ensure the amount that was arrived at was reasonable. In terms of findings, we certainly have nothing significant to flag to your attention. There was the one misstatement that Ms. Kennedy spoke to, and this has been corrected and is included in the financial statements that are included in the package today. Continuing to move on to page 96 of the agenda, we have highlighted the other accounting standard that was in effect for the current year, and it was a suite of standards largely surrounding financial instruments. The implementation of these standards did not have a significant impact on the consolidated financial statements of the city, but it did result in some additional disclosures that have been incorporated in the financial statements. As the city does not hold any investments that are required to be recorded at fair value under this standard, that's ultimately why it didn't have a true impact on the actual numbers that are reported on your balance sheet or your income statement. Ultimately, due to the minimal impact, we truly don't have any significant findings to report from the implementation of this standard. If we continue to move on to page 97 of the package, it speaks to the audit misstatements. As we progressed through the audit, we did use a materiality threshold of $10 million as we performed our procedures. This translates into an audit posting threshold of $500,000, which is the number we use to accumulate misstatements and differences to bring back to the committee as part of our findings report. Ms. Kennedy also highlighted the items that are included on this page, so I will not go through them in detail, but I will emphasize with respect to the uncorrected misstatement, we are comfortable that it is not material to the financial statements as a whole, and it did not impact our audit opinion. Ultimately, this is a timing difference, and it will be corrected through fiscal 2024. Moving forward 2 pages to page 99 of the package, we have added some commentary related to control deficiencies. In our role as external auditors for the city, we are also responsible for communicating any significant deficiencies and internal controls that we might identify throughout our audit procedures and warrant the attention of the committee. I'm happy to report that we did not identify any significant deficiencies as is highlighted on this page. As we work through the audit, we also remain alert for any best practices, process improvement points, or other matters to flag as part of the audit. These observations have been provided separately to the management team. Continuing to move forward, pages 100 and 101 of the agenda ultimately go hand in hand. On page 100, we have summarized the new accounting standards that were implemented in the year, and on page 101 of the package, we have ultimately concluded that the financial statement presentation disclosure that is in the package in front of you today complies with the financial reporting framework of the city, and we have no other significant financial reporting matters to highlight to the committee's attention. Page 102 of the package speaks to specific topics, and although this is a new slide in the current year, it's certainly not new information. The purpose of this slide is ultimately to formalize key items we would be required to communicate back to the committee if they were applicable. Looking at this page, you can see that we have no matters to report, which means we did not encounter any issues in the audit that require a formal communication back to the committee. With that, I will hand things back to Lori to walk through the remainder of our presentation.
Thanks very much, Caitlin. So moving along on page number 103 of your package, just as a reminder to the committee, in order for us to be engaged as your external auditor, we need to be exceptionally mindful, I would say, with respect to our independence. So what that means is really making sure that we remain that independent third set of eyes on the financial reporting process to ultimately be able to opine on the financial statements. So we need to be cautious with respect to any non-audit services that we might provide through the course of the year to the city to make sure that none of those services may be thought either in fact or in appearance to potentially impair our independence. Pleased to say through the course of the year, there have been no significant services provided and certainly no services where we would ultimately get ourselves into trouble if we were to put ourselves in the position of management and make decisions and then ultimately opine on those decisions. So pleased to reconfirm to the committee here this evening that we have remained independent through the course of our audit engagement for fiscal 2023. So moving into the back, really the highlight really of tonight's report is on page 106 of your package, which is our draft auditor's report, which you can see is in draft. It will be finalized upon council's approval of the financial statements, but it is a clean opinion based on the items that you've heard here this evening. Certainly no significant findings that would ultimately impact our opinion. So it is a clean opinion where we say the financial statements do present fairly in all material respects the financial activities of the city for fiscal 2023. There are a few new additions in this report that you would not have seen in previous years. However, they are standard in this instance. And this is where I'll go back to those new accounting standards that have also implicated our audit report, which is why we have included an emphasis of matter and an other matter paragraph in our report to essentially alert a user of the financial statements as to the reason why the comparative figures in 2023, being 2022, are different than the 2022 sets of financial statements. And certainly as part of our engagement for 2023, we've audited those adjustments that have impacted previous years. So that is standard language in this year of audit standard implementation, and those will certainly go away in the future. The balance of the items in the deck are really more informational items, and perhaps, Mr. Chair, this is a great place to pause and welcome any questions that there might be from the group.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Are there any questions from members of the committee with regards to this item? Okay, I'm seeing, oh, Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Thank you, Ms. Huber and Ms. Cox, for the report. Greatly appreciate it. Very in-depth, and it's great to hear that our CFO's team is once again doing outstanding work. Mike, a very quick question. You have indicated, and I asked this question last year, and I asked for an adjustment on this, and I see it didn't take place, and I'm just curious, under the audited misstatement posting threshold of 500,000, what is the standard industry practice for this threshold? Is it based, obviously it's based on our annual revenue, but our annual revenue keeps going up every year. We keep getting clean audited opinions since I've been here, so we're now on number 3, and our audited threshold has not been increased. So I'm just wondering, what is the standard industry practice then?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take the first cut at that question. Maybe, Caitlin, I don't have the audit planning report up in front of me to get the percentages, but if you wouldn't mind taking a quick peek at that, that might be helpful. So as part of our audit plan for fiscal 2023, we had set out at an overall reporting materiality of $10 million, which is at the group level. So the handbook will tell you that you can go anywhere between 0.5% to 3%. And it tends to be based on a combination of factors, and ultimately it comes down to the auditor's judgment. I would say the operations of a corporation like the City of Kingston, with all of the individual components and departments and complexities to link all together to ultimately get to the financial statements along with the components, certainly adds more layers than a standalone set of financial statements. So we would never, with the size and scale of an organization like yours, ever be at that 3% mark. We tend to hover closer to the 2% mark, generally speaking. It could change, but we also knew this year going into the new world of accounting standards that could potentially be caught in that piece as well. So it's something that we don't take lightly. We do factor in any control matters, any audit misstatements, changeover in the finance team. All of those things, either quantitatively or qualitatively, come into the ultimate determination by us in terms of our level of materiality. So when it comes to the posting threshold, certainly at KPMG, our audit approach is to make that posting threshold 5% of the overall materiality. What I will also say is that, as we know, the financial statements are group financial statements. All of the individual components are separately opined on, so they have their individual materialities as well. And certainly we allow for any aggregation risk in those individual components as we work our way through to the group financial statements. So hopefully that helps to provide some clarity on the determination, certainly for fiscal 2023. I don't know, Caitlin, if you were able to pull up that percentage or not.
Yeah, I did, absolutely. So as a bit more background, we do set our materiality based on total expenses rather than total revenues. We find there's more stability in total expenses. Your revenues do fluctuate depending on government grants, the timing they come in, new restrictions, and there's ultimately been, I would say, more complexity probably over the last 5 years with respect to your revenue. So we use expenses as our base. Certainly acknowledge that expenses do continue to increase as well, which would be expected as your revenues increase. The percentages year over year have sat between 1.7% this year. If we go back to 2 years ago, it was at 1.9%. So we really are ultimately sitting at that 2% mark. And I would say the differential is ultimately due to rounding. So we do reevaluate that each year. And as part of our planning process, as Lori mentioned, we consider quantitative and qualitative considerations, as well as the complexity of the organization. Ultimately, due to the size and the scale of the city, that's why we are comfortable sitting around that 2% mark, and it will likely fluctuate exactly where it falls, ultimately just due to rounding, so that we have a clean number that we're performing our audit work over.
Thank you both for your explanation on that. Greatly appreciate it. You've been doing obviously the city's books for, I will say, a number of years. Yes. So I would ask for consideration that you've indicated 1.7 and 1.9%, if we can move that threshold a little bit higher. I understand the complexity of the city. I get it. I know what you're saying. And there is fluctuation with grants that do come in and provincial funding that seems to flow at its own pace. So I get that, and I'll leave it at that, but I appreciate the explanation. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions from members of the committee with regards to this report? Okay, are there any members of the public present wishing to speak to this topic? Okay, seeing none, do I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation in this report? I see it moved by Councillor Glenn, seconded by Councillor Hassan. All those in favor? Okay, and that's carried. Thank you very much. Our next item of business is the report for short-term rental bylaw amendments. I invite staff to introduce this report now. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. We have prepared this report for the purpose of providing housekeeping changes and to introduce short-term brokerage, also known as platform operators regulations.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Would you just mind just moving the microphone a bit closer? I'm a little hard of hearing, so
Okay.
thank you.
Is this better? Excellent. Okay, so I can repeat that. So basically, we have prepared this report for the purpose of providing housekeeping changes and to introduce regulating short-term rental brokerages, also known as platform operators. We were not asked to report back on the SDR operations, but have provided a brief update on the current situation and provide some context around the reasoning we wish to regulate these brokerages. Some highlights include an increase in licensed SDRs since the last report, from 173 to 216, an increase in MAT collected in 2023 over 2023 over 2022. We took a more proactive approach with enforcement over the last year. We've issued 117 enforcement letters. After two notices were issued, written notices were issued, 11 AMPs were issued for non-compliant STR operators. The method we use to investigate, or otherwise known as scrub for properties, was by utilizing the program AirDNA. It proved somewhat useful, but it wasn't as accurate as we would have liked. It required a lot of resources and staff time to get the information we needed. And as I said, it wasn't always as accurate as we had hoped. We are asking to regulate SDR brokerages so that we may enter into data sharing agreements with these brokerage companies whereby specific data from the platform is reported to the municipality at regular intervals. This will provide us with the information we currently cannot obtain through other sources such as SDR addresses, sales information, and tax collected information. Obtaining this information will streamline enforcement efforts, increase overall compliance, improve staffing efficiency, provide more accurate data on STRs operating in the City of Kingston, provide increased compliance, which will result in increased MAT and license revenues. We provided you with a list of 6 municipalities in the report that currently regulate brokers with their associated fees. The fees we're proposing are tiered. We are not asking a high level. Actually, we're probably on the lower end of the fees. And the reason we're doing this is we're not trying to discourage brokers from wanting to operate in Kingston, but rather encourage them to work with us. We're hoping to create working relationships with them so that we can get the information we need to adequately enforce and ensure that SDRs are in compliance. The charges that we're requesting for the AMPs are set at $300. It's slightly higher than our current SDR operating without a license, which is set at $250. It's not too punitive, but hopefully enough to encourage compliance. We have identified 8 brokers. 5 are advertising Kingston properties at this time: Airbnb, Verbo, Cottages in Canada, TripAdvisor, and Booking.com. 4 of these have already been advised of our intent to make changes, and 2 of them have already reached out to us and are willing to work with us. That would be Airbnb and Booking.com. As soon as upon your approval and council approval, we'll be able to continue discussions with them. We also did a public engagement. We provided a draft bylaw and the proposed changes on Get Involved Kingston. All licensed STR operators were invited to engage in the survey. We received 1,043 views, 116 participants, 14 participants commented, and we received 24 comments in total. None of the comments that we received would suggest modifying any of the changes that we're recommending. That's all I have, and ready for questions.
Thank you very much, sir. Are there any questions from members of the committee with regards to this report? Councillor Son?
Just a quick question about Airbnb. a lot of my constituents has asked if we are going to include Airbnb, which I appreciate that you said that you have initiated conversation with them and they are agreed to work with the city.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, thank you for clearing that. And I think this is a great idea to include them because in the city of Kingston, a lot of people operating their property as Airbnb, and that'll be good
Yeah, I'd say-
addition to it.
Yeah, probably 60 or probably about 70% of SDRs operate on Airbnb.
And can you share if you have any data available? If it's not now, just share with me later on, probably, that how many companies approximately are operating in the similar fashion with Airbnb type of thing?
On Verbo, I do believe, yeah, on Verbo, it's probably, I think, 48. Now, those aren't 100% confirmed. Some could be, hotel motel / longer term. These are things that we gotta work through. But the other platforms, the other 4, are all under 50, and the lowest of them is cottages in Canada. I think there's about 28. So very small in comparison to Airbnb.
So the city has the mandate and power to impose such fees or licensing requirement to all those companies or organizations?
Yes, we do, yeah. The other municipalities that are listed have already engaged in this practice. It's not an easy task, to get them on side, but it has worked for some municipalities. And as I mentioned, we already have 2 that have initiated conversations with us. So, and one of the big ones is Airbnb. So I'm rather optimistic about us making this work.
Let's do slow and steady, win the race.
Okay, are there any other members of the committee that wish to ask questions, speak to the report? Seeing none, are there any members of the public present wishing to speak to this report? Okay, well, do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Hassan moves, Councillor Glenn seconds. All those in favor? Okay, and that's carried. The final item of business tonight is the tax write-offs pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001. I invite staff to introduce this report. I see Mr. Walker on the screen. Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone. In front of you tonight, you have a tax write-off report. This is a report that comes to the committee 3 or 4 times a year, and it recommends a write-off of properties for a variety of reasons as listed in the report. Examples of the types of write-offs would be if there's been a physical change to the property itself, such as a demolition or being damaged by fire, or a change in the use of a property. The report can also be used to correct a clerical error in the return of the assessment roll in either the application year or any of the 2 previous taxation years as applicable. There is an exhibit to the report that lists each of the properties receiving a write-off along with the amount of the write-off, and the exhibit also splits each write-off into its municipal and education components, as well as any applicable downtown business levy component. The amounts that are recommended for write-off are included in the 2024 budget and are charged against that budget, so there is no further financial impact to this report beyond that. As of that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. Are there any questions from members of the committee? I see Councillor Amos has his hand up already. Councillor Amos, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Thank you for the report. Just a very quick question. I know you had indicated that money is set aside in the budget. Have we surpassed the budget with this total?
Thank you for the question. We have not surpassed the budget total.
Perfect.
The budget with this report.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Hassan, you're grabbing the microphone quickly.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, through you. May I ask you that how long the property can be vacant? Is there any standard for a certain time? They can, how many year possibly they can claim tax-free those property for whatever the reason they are applying for?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. it would really depend on the reason that they are requesting the tax write-off. If they've changed the use of the property or the owner of the property, such as a property that's bought by the city or a charity, it could go exempt and stay exempt as long as that ownership stays in place. If it's for something that was damaged or demolished or damaged by fire, we would remove the value of the structure that was damaged or demolished. And then when a permit was taken out to put a new structure up, it would then be assessed by MPAC when it was completed, and that would become the new value that was added to the tax roll. Not sure if I've answered your question there,
Yes,
but.
yes, you did, Mr. The other question is, how about the rental property, such like commercial rental property, if the owner is not renting out purposely because they want higher rent, so, and they know if they don't rent it, that is okay because they can write off the taxes. Is that any bylaw the city has that we can force them to, for a certain time, to leave it vacant and ask them to rent it out?
Thank you for the question. So back a few years ago, council did vote to get rid of the vacancy rebate program. So there is no incentive to a property owner to not have a tenant in the property. The property is still going to be taxed at its full value and at the full tax rate. And then in the past year, council went another step further in that we removed the vacant subclass, the tax rate for vacant land subclasses. So vacant land as well now is taxed at the full either industrial or commercial rate. And that again was done in order to incent people to develop their properties.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Okay, are there any other questions from members of the committee? Okay, seeing none. Any questions from members of the public? Okay, so we have a recommendation in front of us that the Administrative Policies Committee recommends as follows: that council approve the cancellation, reduction, or refund of taxes pursuant to applications made under sections 357 and 358 of the Municipal Act 2001, totaling $139,807.25, of which $109,357.82 is the city's portion, and the amount charged back to the school boards is $30,449.43 for the properties listed in Exhibit A to report number AP-24-018. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Glenn, seconded by Councillor Amos. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. There are no motions. There are no notices of motion. Is there any other business? Not seeing any. Okay, there's no correspondence. The date of the next meeting of the Administrative Policies Committee is scheduled for Thursday, September 12th, 2024 at 6 p.m. And do I have a mover and seconder for adjournment? Moved by Councillor Glenn, seconded by Councillor Hassan. All those in favor? Okay, it is 6:53. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.